Hello, welcome to the Urban Fantasy track, part of DragonCon Goes Virtual 2020. You'll be joining us today for our discussion of favors, bargains, and glamours, the Fae in urban fantasy. We have some great folks taking part tonight, and I'm going to have each one of them introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. Lisa, we'll start with you.
Great. My name is Lisa Manifold. I write urban fantasy and paranormal romance, and I love the Fae. I am a longtime fan of Labyrinth, which is one of my first introductions to the Fae, and then some of Jim's books also, I have to say, just in a little fangirl moment. But I tend to put the Fae in almost everything I write in one way or another, so I was really excited when Carol asked if I wanted to be on this panel.
I was excited you said yes.
So was I.
Lisa.
Bishop O'Connell. I write urban fantasy. My series is the American Fairy Tale series. It's basically traditional fairy tales and folklore stories brought into the modern age. As you might have picked up from my name, I'm a little on the Irish side. So I've got a lot of interest in Irish folklore and fairies and that. Now I also give a nod to Jim in my first book, actually, to the Dresden Files. That somebody mentions about trying to find a wizard, and it's not like you can look them up in the phone book under W's.
Patty.
I'm Patty Briggs. I write under Patricia Briggs. I write the Mercy Thompson series and the Alpha Omega series, and I've been writing since time immemorial. I love that word, time immemorial. About 95, I think, is when my first book came out. So I'm old. I've written a lot.
29.
I'm 29.
Oh, there you go.
I started when I was 4.
Very accomplished at a young age. Cecilia.
Hi, I am Cecilia Dominic. By day, I'm a clinical psychologist and I help people sleep without drugs. By night, I write urban fantasy and steampunk that I hope will keep people up all night. No, it's totally not a conflict of interest. And I'm really excited to be on this panel because my urban fantasy universe has just been expanding and expanding and expanding. And I recently brought in the Fae with my Fae files, as you can see behind me. So this is very exciting. And of course, I owe much to my predecessors.
And Jim.
Hi, I'm Jim Butcher. I'm the author of the Dresden Files, the Codex Alera, and the Cinder Spires. I started loving the Fae starting with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which was very clearly a war of winter versus summer, and just kind of went from there.
Yeah.
It's certainly a good starting point for sure.
That would surprise C.S. Lewis, I think, but I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, once you read the descriptions, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Too bad you can't ask him, right? Or at least not in person. Okay, so for each of you, do the Fae in your worlds have specific purposes that have caused them to kind of infiltrate human society? Or are they really just trying to disappear and become a part of human society? And let's see, Jim, we'll start with you this time.
In the Dresden Files of the Fae that I write, they kind of have a larger purpose. The Winter Court sort of exists to protect the mortal world against all the things that are out there in the Never Never that could come in and wreck it. And then the Summer Court exists to protect the mortal world from the Winter Court, just in case they decide that, that they got a little bit bored today. So that is sort of where they start from. That's not like all the Fae in the universe, but most of the Fae are just going around kind of doing their job, dewdrop fairies are dispensing dewdrops and, all that sort of thing. And people just don't notice them because we're not real bright, or real quick or real smart. So, they go about doing their thing, and mostly we just don't see it.
All right. Cecilia.
So in my universe, the Fae exist in a sort of parallel dimension. And so it's their dimension, and then it's also the collective unconscious, which is another dimension. And they are sort of the barrier between the collective unconscious and the human world. Just saw Jim's dog, cute. And my main character, Raina, she's a Fae princess and she has been exiled. And so she is trying to figure out how much of the human world she really wants to be a part of.
Ah, okay. Patty.
So in the Mercy series, well, the Mercy and Alpha Mega series, the Fae I have is sort of in a post-apocalyptic, post-Fae apocalyptic state. So they used to be highly organized. They had different courts. They had these are here's the powers. There's the powers. They kind of ran along in the traditions of the Welsh folklore. But Christianity happened, Cold Iron happened, and now they're fighting for survival. And so they do whatever they have to do. If that means they have to blend in, they blend in. When that wasn't working, they decided to come out and present just the happy fairies, the good fairies, the nice, weak, easy fairies, and all the scary bad guys hid themselves or were killed to survive. But that changes on a book by book basis what their current tact is. And I, throw things at them like they built a passageway to Underhill, which they had lost the ability to go to Underhill, which is that parallel dimension. And then they found Underhill, which was alive, and they knew it was alive. It was very unfriendly now to Fae. So they're kind of caught between the human population and Underhill, and trying to survive between those two, rock and a hard place. So whatever they have to do.
It's a challenge. And Bishop.
So in my world, the Fae, the fairies are, I go with Tir na Nog, the Irish land of eternal youth. But in my world, basically all the monsters are different types of fairies. Everything from all of our folklore is in one group or another. The main two houses, there's a dawn court and a dusk court, which is sort of the traditional, the good and the bad. But a long time ago, a group of Fae broke away to live on Earth and formed the Rogue Court. And as part of that, spending so much time around humanity, they've actually started evolving along with humans. So like, for example, spoiler alert, the Dawn and the Dusk Court fairies can't lie, but some of the Rogue Court Fae have developed that ability. But part of evolving with it, they have glamour, but they hide in plain sight. So for example, the fairies own nightclubs, have stock portfolios, use machine guns and cell phones. The first book is set in Boston, and they actually have charms on cars that make other cars just move out of the way for them.
That would be handy.
I would like that.
That's a little wishful thinking.
Yeah, I live in Atlanta. That'd be useful.
Yeah.
Yeah, just drive straight through the parking lot, like a leaf blower, all the cars flying out.
Yes.
But they're bound by what's called the Hearth Codes, which were laws that were so it's an agreement that was settled between them and humanity when they came over. But basically, it's the typical sense to where the good fairies are trying to mess with humans, the bad fairies are trying to be mischievous. But it's basically, I wanted to take the idea that all folklore is a common place, and that America being a melting pot, that America is sort of where all the different fairies from all the different folklores come together, and they're all different branches. And
Cool. Thank you. Lisa.
So when I started my Realm series, which is I think 6 books, 6 books, I had a very separate wall between the Fae and the human world. Like the Fae chose to keep themselves walled away from the human world. But then when I wrote the Omani Prophecy, they ended up merging more, and it didn't always turn out well for the Fae, because the Fae were, sort of susceptible to some of our bad habits, like going out and drinking too much, or, doing some of our bad chemical addictions. But generally the Fae in my stories tend to stay away, or at least a couple of, levels distant from the humans, because kind of like Jim, they don't think we're all that together, or we're not that smart, and we do a lot of dumb stuff, and they see the problems in that. So while I started out very separate, when they started coming together, it didn't go very well for the Fae.
Oh.
Even with all the magic and all the extra enhancements that the Fae had, the Fae didn't always have the ability to conquer some of our worst habits.
Okay. If you, I guess, pick maybe a couple, but what would be some of the most defining characteristics, would you say, of the Fae as a whole that you write? And Cecilia, we'll start with you this time.
Oh, wow. So they have a whole separate value system than humans do.
Okay.
which is a lot of fun and provides a lot of great motivation. Like humans, we think we're pretty shallow, but in my world, fae who have been scarred in some way are not allowed to go into fairy anymore. They are exiled, or as my heroine finds out, if you are blamed or somehow involved in a fae being scarred, you're not allowed back in.
Actual physical scar, you mean?
Actual physical scars. So
Okay.
yes, they value physical perfection. So, and then they have a different, we would think of them as being amoral rather than immoral. So, rather than thinking of things as being good or bad, it's basically, okay, is this beneficial to me or not? And that's how they define whether somebody's behavior is acceptable.
Oh, okay. They sound just lovely. Patty?
So just as a way to put them all together in a group, because the Fae of Folklore, you have the traveling Fae, you have specific Fae that haunt different places or live in different places, you have the court Fae, you have all of these groups, just to give them a defining characteristic so that I could put them in the one group. I just said that what made a Fae is the ability to do glamour, so that they look like something else. And then some of the groups of Fae that aren't as good at it, like the goblins and a couple other groups, are looked down upon by the other Fae, and maybe even not considered Fae. In fact, some of them are food to the other Fae. But it was just a way for me, the writer, to put all of these people, all of these characters in a single group that made them coherent, rather than have them as just random supernatural creatures who are living out on their own. So that is what makes, in my world, that's what makes a Fae be a Fae. And that was totally arbitrary, because that's not really true in folklore, and it's not really true in that's kind of an odd thing to say, right? Really true in folklore, but so it was just an arbitrary thing that seemed necessary. And after that, they're just who they are. I steal wholeheartedly from any fairy tale, any folklore story, from anywhere in the world, and pull them into my story just for fun. Like Baba Yaga, I just decided she was a fae and not a witch. And because my witches are differently powered than Baba Yaga. She lives in a house that stands on a chicken leg. By golly, she's fae, right? And she has metal teeth. That makes her fae. And I threw in the Dark Smith of Dronheim, which is a character I found out from a little story in a book of fairy tales about the Isle of Man. It was published in about 1920. And my mother was a children's librarian, and she had a copy of it donated to her, my school library, that had about maybe 500 books altogether when that was donated. And as a kid, I read it, and I read it several times, because I read a lot of fairy tales. And when I was putting the character together, I knew I was basing them on somebody had read. And then when I hit the third book, and Z. Adalbert Schmeider needed to have his background put together, I went through hell trying to find that book again. Thank goodness for what is the project where the Gutenberg Project. Thank you. I had a copy of it, and I was able to find it. Do not Google fairy staff. Just don't do that. Right? Right. It took me a while to find it, because I just had to find the right words. But it's a fascinating, that particular story I love, because it's set on the Isle of Man, which was, settled, Vikings have been there, Scots have been there, various other groups have been there. So you'll have like Clarence O'Malley and the Dark Smith of Dronheim, which is like a Norwegian region, right? In the same story. And it's awesome. It made me very happy. So, and I just babbled on. I'm sorry. We'll let go on.
That's fine. We're all excited about your book, that you found that book. Bishop.
So in mine, the two main Fae courts, the Dawn and the Dusk, they sort of serve the purpose like the yin and yang, order and chaos. They're basically there to balance each other out, because both are necessary. You can't have a functioning world without some chaos, but you don't want it to get out of control, so you have to have some order, but you don't want too much order, because then you lose creativity in life. So they're all balanced out, and their interactions with humans stem from the fact that they're not able to reproduce amongst themselves. Only the two monarchs can create new Fae. However, the Fae can breed with humans to make changelings who, when they reach a certain age, have to make a decision whether they want to be mortal or be Fae. And if they're Fae, then they join
That's
whatever
cool.
perspective court it is. But I got the idea of how I wanted them to be from their moral sense. I think Cecilia said it best. They're not immoral, they're amoral. That it started from the idea of the Yeats poem, The Stolen Child. That the idea of fairies stealing away a little kid, that what kind of creatures would do this? You know, even in thinking it was the best thing for the child, I mean, that's a whole different sense of right and wrong that would take that. And I also wanted to have the effect of what happens on the other end of that, the parents who have the kid taken away.
Yeah.
So it's and when you're immortal, not, well, you can be killed, but you don't die type of immortality. It really, you have to have a different perspective on things, on the world. You know, a lot of the way we view things and a lot of our morality stems from the fact of not wanting to die and not wanting other people to die. And if that's not a factor, and if, you know, years are like hours, you know, it's reverse dog years type thing, I think it adjusts what the morality is for those creatures and the way they see the world. And that's where I wanted them to try and pull it together, and how that interaction and it confluences with the humans. And on one side, maybe it's more of the patronizing sense, and on the other sense, it's sort of like the Doctor Who, that I think you're giants, I think you're beautiful. So like, for example, the Fae think gray hair is beautiful, and that wrinkles are beautiful because they don't get those. So they're
Oh, interesting.
I like that.
Yeah. Interesting concept. Thank you. Lisa.
So it's interesting. Cecilia said something about a scar, and it's funny. In one of my series, one of the scarred figures is not accepted in the world of Fae, because my Fae also value physical beauty, and because they have magic and are able to affect magic upon themselves, they don't understand why someone would keep a physical scar. So it's not so much the physical scar as it is, why would you not fix something when you have the ability to fix it? You know, and this character's kind of contrary, so he didn't. The other thing is they really value children, because while the Fae in my world, in my various series, can have children, it's rare. You know, Fae live for so long. You know, most of my leadership Fae is over 1,000 years old, so they're not having kids every 5 years. You know, having a child is very much a rare event and something to be celebrated. So children are very much valued. And probably the last thing is they have a sense of interconnectedness, you know, to the world around them. Now, how they look at that is different, because some are very materialistic and very shallow, and others are not. But they tend to see the world in a little more of an interconnected way. So it's a little bit amoral, and how will this help me? What will this do for me? But they also look at how does that ripple out beyond them, and if they're amoral, does it affect me negatively? But probably for me, the kids are the biggest thing, because kids don't happen often. So one of the things that my Fae really love about humans, even though they stay distance from them, is how easily humans have children. Because that doesn't, like when if two people get together in the Fae world and they have a kid within the first 100 years, that union is considered blessed, because that's not normal. You have to be together for a couple of 100 years before anything like that happens. And no, I don't explain that. Like, there's no rhyme or reason as to why one couple gets pregnant and the other one doesn't.
Well, plus that's an awfully long time to wait, I guess, if you live forever, but yes, still.
What's that idea of, if you live forever, you know, do you want all of your kids to be as old as you are, or do you want to space it out? And a lot of times my Fae don't have more than 1 or 2 kids. If they have 2 kids, that's really blessed. So Fae reproduce slowly because they live for so long.
Oh, okay. Makes sense. Jim.
I think when you're talking about Fae in general, there's a number of characteristics that tend to apply to them as a whole. Fae are almost always interconnected with nature in some way. You will always find them around a pool, around a river, in a mountain, a particular stone. You know, the Fae are always associated with that. They share a lot with the Japanese kami from the Shinto religion in that sense. They are always alien. Like, you never really understand what's happening with the Fae. One of the things when you're dealing with the Fae that is always a constant is that there's an element of uncertainty. Whatever's going to be going on there, you're not quite sure what's going to happen because you don't think like they do. You don't know what they know. You don't have the same priorities they have or the same point of view on the world. So you're never really going to get a fae that deals with you straight, even when they're willing to deal with you straight, because it's just not possible because they're so different. One of the other characteristics of fae is they're almost always associated with children and reproduction in some way. I don't know why that is, but that seems to be a fact. It's that way with fae in the British Isles. It's that way with fae in Scandinavia, in Western Europe, and Eastern Europe, on east into Russia, wherever there's fae. That's always one of the things that's connected to them, and we don't know why. I love to go into theories about how, the Fae might have been an alien species that was actually here a few thousand years ago, and humans sort of remember a few things about them, and they've become stories during that time.
I've heard that maybe the Neanderthal sponsored some of the fairy tales.
Oh, well, see, I like to think of the idea of let's posit that there are legitimate Sasquatch out there going around, and who are we? We're the weird little people that make the weird lights and music and strange noises and ride through the air. We've become the Fae. That's who we are now.
Interesting, yes. Now, from a narrative standpoint, what is the importance for you, or is it a challenge, the characteristic that seems to be pretty universally accepted that the Fae can't lie? So I'm thinking that must affect how you go about your writing, or do you not actually have that as a characteristic of your Fae? And Patty, we'll start with you this time.
Yeah, so I stole that as a hard and fast rule, and then I wrote a book in which the Fae lied, and I had to figure out why. So then I had to figure out why they don't lie, and I decided that it was a bargain with the earlier creatures, and that it was a very important bargain. And if any of the Fae lie, then they come down. Something happens to them. And if you are not very powerful, you just kind of go and you're gone. And if you're very powerful, sometimes they may have to have fate intervene. Or in the case of one of my books, one of my main characters was kind of empowered to go and destroy this Fae. For such that she shouldn't have been able to get anywhere near. So many of the determinations about how my world works happened because I screwed up somewhere, and I had to figure out how to make that work. But yeah, it actually, when you're writing stories, it really helps to have things you have to work around. So for instance, when I chose that the werewolves take time to change, it really gave my stories a lot more power because I had to work around things. So that the Fae can't lie is just another thing. I see you have friends, Jim.
Oh, there we go. Now, who is
there so you can see it.
The mighty Fenris.
That is Fenris. Okay, I wasn't sure if that was him or not, but I'm glad he's still there.
Fenris of the raccoon tail. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, so that the Fae can't lie is just another one of those things that as a storyteller I have to work around. But because I have to work around, it makes the story more powerful and more interesting. And it gives me some things I can do, like having somebody tell exactly the truth and have it be totally a lie. Right, so I lie with the truth.
Bishop.
So in my world, the Fae are sort of bound or birthed from magic, and magic is sort of another energy force, like gravity, strong and weak forces, magnetism, all that. It's just, in our particular dimension, it's not quite as prevalent or noticeable. And them not being able to lie is part of their tie to magic, which is why the Rogue Court, when they started spending so much time on Earth, like literally eons, back during the early Middle Ages, they've started to evolve because that separation they've had from sort of their homeland and the root of the magic. So, and mine actually worked out the sort of similar to Patty's, that I screwed up at the end of my first book. And I forgot that in the book I mentioned that they couldn't lie, and one of the main characters, who's a Fae, at the end of the book says something, and the beat is he lied. And after I wrote and sent it out and it got published, my editor said, "Hey, I've been meaning to ask you about that." Right behind that, and I was like, "Oh, I should probably come up with something for that, shouldn't I?" So that's where I came up with the idea of the evolution. But I think it's also a lot of the ritual side of it that we see the Fae bound a lot of rituals and ceremonies and things. Like the threes is another common thing that in mine it's thrice promised and bound. That if you want to know that a Fae isn't lying to you or screwing you over, you make them promise it 3 times.
Threes are big, yeah. Three is big with Fae.
Threes, nines, and 12s, and for some reason not 6s, but 3s, 9s, and 12s.
Yeah, 3's a magical number, right?
And 7s. 3s, 9s, 12s,
and 7s.
Yeah.
So it's I think it was a lot of that ritual, which, like I said, I pull a lot from the different folklores, but in some of the more modern takes of Irish fairy tales, one of the beliefs that made Irish Catholicism blend with Irish folklore is that fairies were the angels that stood aside when Lucifer rebelled. So they didn't rebel, so they couldn't be sent to hell, but they didn't fight in God's favor, so they couldn't stay in heaven, so God sent them to earth. So I like that idea of sort of the outcast, and that has the same kind of rules and rituals and sort of otherness. That's where I pulled from, that it's tied to the core of who they are, and it's not so much that if they do lie that it breaks something, it's they physically are unable. And also, you know, the fairies are sort of the lawyers of the folklore world, right? That it's, you know, like Patty said, you know, they can tell you a complete lie, but every word they've said is true, you know, or the way that they've worded something, you know.
Right. Yeah.
That's really fun to write. That's a really fun thing to write.
It's like the wish spells in D&D, right? I remember one comic I saw where somebody had an Efreet, and he said, let me get this straight. You want me to raise, R-A-Z-E, all of your attributes? Yeah, that sounds great. So always get it in writing.
My husband did a D&D campaign where they were searching for the golden fleas. And they got it right.
No.
Right?
Oh, yikes.
No.
Thank you. Lisa.
So my Fae can't lie, but they can sort of word things carefully so that it's not quite a lie, but it is not the entire truth. And and some of the Fae have no problem with just not saying it. You know, it's not a lie, it's just an omission. But one of the things, and it's funny, a couple of you guys mentioned like how you wrote yourself into a corner and you're like, oh crap, how do I get out of this corner that I just put myself into? And one of the ways that I did that was that if I have a Fae character who does a little too much of that lie by omission or that very careful phrasing that's not entirely true, is it changes your character, it changes your magic, it has a negative effect on you. So it's a choice. And if you make that choice and you continue to make that choice, it has negative, long-lasting effects, because I really like the idea of good and evil and very clear lines, but people and even Fae don't operate that way. So I had to make it a little more gray. So they can lie, but it's very carefully thought out, and there are consequences if you do too much of it.
It's like the Force, right? If you throw
yes, yes, very much like the Force. Well, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, so that idea of good versus evil, very much there.
Jim.
In my world, the fairies can't lie because of their tie to nature and the world around them. If they start lying, they are essentially using their will to start taking themselves out of alignment with the natural world, and that does horrible things to them and reduces their powers. So you know, the Fae, they kind of can't lie, but they also don't wanna. So like all the lower Fae are usually like terribly honest because they just don't have enough to spare to take that kind of chance. The higher level Fae are the ones who will just lie to you left and right because it just doesn't matter. I mean, they won't tell you a falsehood, but they will deceive you every time, because there is a difference between a fact and the truth. And the Fae are very, very good at handling their facts and avoiding the truth when they need to.
Right.
Yeah, and as you were saying, there's a difference between deception and coming out and lying.
Yeah, the difference between deception and being open with someone.
Well, I think there's some things that are associated with the Fae in general in the fairy tale world. One of them is that they can't lie. Another one is the idea of balance, and the balance goes for the bargains. You know, fairies make bargains. And they're bargains are very important, and they're very important that it's an even bargain. If they give you a gift that makes your life better, it also makes your life worse. I mean, that's part of who in general in real folklore. That's what they do. That's why the changelings work as they do. They take your child, but they have to leave something behind. They leave a fae behind, right? They leave a changeling. And I think that that's another fun thing to play with, and it's a way for writers to keep their fae. If you're, those of you who are out there listening to this, if you're writing the fae, that's something that you can use very effectively to make your fae, your fairies, feel alien from the humans. Jim actually does that really well when Harry becomes the. Of course he does. But when Harry becomes the Winter Knight, he starts being much more concerned with balance, much more concerned with, I promised you this, here it is. You did this for me, I owe you this. He's much more concerned with that. And I thought that was a really subtle and very scary way of showing how that is influencing Harry. That's really obvious to readers, and it's obvious to Harry and his friends. It was cool.
He sees it from both sides now.
Mm-hmm.
Cecilia.
So I hadn't really thought about the Fae not lying, but perhaps it was in there somewhere, because my Fae, typically they don't. I mean, they would be considered high Fae, so I guess kind of, in alignment with what Jen said, if they lie, it's not going to ding them too hard. But they are very avoidant about telling the entire truth. They're really good at hiding stuff. And they are also really good at not asking direct questions about things that they really don't want to know.
Oh, so they don't have to deal with a direct answer and then it's consequences.
They're like lawyers.
Yep.
Well, now, in Dead Heat, Patty, you have Charles make the observation that the Fae use fear as a weapon and as a way to protect themselves. And what I'm curious about is that for all of you, do you have, do your versions of the Fae also do that? Do they rely upon that at all in any of them? And Bishop, it's your turn to go first, I believe.
There is one of the groups of fairies, again, in mind with the courts, there's a caste system among the Fae, which is also seems to be a common factor amongst fairy tales, that you have the nobles and the lessers. And in mine, you have the nobles and the have-nots. And on the Dust Court, there's a group called the Ike, or Night Fae, that look like 13-year-old goths with all pointed teeth. Because to me, there's nothing more frightening than scary children.
That is pretty scary.
And they sort of use a dark seduction, that it's like that you want to be scared type thing, and to trick you into making bargains, to lure you away. And in my world, that's where the folklore of vampires come from, is from the Ike, because the pale, they often make bargains for blood because they can use that to control and manipulate you. But there is also the other effect with Fae, that they like human emotions, that we have a broader range. So they derive some joy from getting the different emotions. So some of the Dusk Fae will screw with you just because it's fun. It's like trolling, right? It's just doing it to see if they can get a rise out of you and get the effect. And on the other side, there's Fae that will do nice things to help you, because the gratitude from humanity is such an awesome thing to witness. So it's not so much for them deriving power from it, but it's another sense of enjoyment, which ties back to their immortality, that those are the kind of things that you would take pleasure in, that would seem important to you, because everything else is everything is transient at that point, right? It's how long it lasts. So the things that are briefest, emotions and reactions from humanity, is something that would hold more interest in them.
Oh, okay. Lisa.
So I kind of, going off of what Bishop said, since my Fae lives so long, they don't feel like they have to be outwardly threatening, and one of the things that this didn't start out this way, it wasn't initially deliberate, but because they like having that sort of separate affection from the rest of the world, they like it that the people that they deal with, whether it's human or other Fae or other supernatural creatures, don't entirely know what they're doing. They don't entirely know what they're capable of. they like that. It's very quiet. It's not an overt threat. It's very covert, because if you don't really know what you're dealing with, I personally find that, excuse me, a little more intimidating than if you understand what you're dealing with and you understand the boundaries. So when I wrote them, they ended up being, they enhance and appreciate that mystery that other supernatural creatures and humans feel for them, or think about them, because it allows for them to have something that you don't know. And when you don't know, that's scarier than something that you do know.
Jim.
I don't really have dedicated scare you fae, except for the fear eaters, the phobophages of the various courts. And the fear eaters are essentially boggarts on steroids. You know, they will shapeshift into something that they know scares you, and then come after you and scare you to death as they're killing you. You know, and that's how they that's how they get along. You know, that's how they make their bread.
That is scary.
Yeah, that is scary. I agree. Cecilia.
So in my world, it's more that, yeah, it's more the uncertainty and the what is the fae going to do to me. So in the Shadow Project, there is a scene where my fae is reaching out to a group of witches where she's going to be, because she knows she's going to need help, because she's going to be going to Atlanta out of Scotland and away from her main sort of nature power source of the underground caves. And so she realizes that she's going to need allies. And her first conversation is with the teenage witch. And it's very difficult because the witch doesn't want to say anything to her, because how are you going to use this against me? And so she finds the fae reputation to be a bit frustrating at that point, because she's like, no, look, I really need your help. And the witch is like, not going to tell you anything, not even my name.
Not very trusting, huh? Probably.
Exactly.
Don't tell them your name.
Yeah, she's
Right.
been warned.
Patty.
So I think this for me goes back to one of the original purposes of the original fairy tales. Certainly like the Grimm's fairy tales were told not to children, they were told from one adult to the other. And the ultimate purpose of them was to tell these good Christian peasants that they needed to be home safe in their cottages with their doors shut, locked against the scary forest and the scary woods, because in the scary forest and scary woods, there were traveling fairies that could steal you and your children, that would do terrible things to you, that were frightening things out in the forest. So you guys don't go out in the forest and congregate and try to overthrow your rulers, right? You be good little Christian peasants and don't go to your pagan rituals, just sit at home. And so for me, all of the fae are kind of tied to that fear, because the original stories, Hansel and Gretel, right? Two little kids get lost in the wood and the witch is going to eat them, right? And that's not the only story that's like that. There's a series of them that are like that. Certainly not all the fairy tales were for that purpose, but some of them certainly seem to be. So for me, that's always tied up in the fae. So the fae to me are always scary. And if you're not afraid of the fae, then you're wrong. Sometimes some of my characters will have personal relationships with fae that they really like, and then find out later that they're really terrifying. The fae don't always act like you expect them to act, and that's scary. And people that you think have your back don't really have your back, and that's scary. So I use that. I don't find them when I'm writing them. I don't use them. The witches are just like horrifyingly scary, and the vampires are vampirically scary. Sorry, but just traditionally scary. The seducer, the predator, that kind of thing. And the fae are just alien, and but in that alien sense, that you're as a human being, your survival is not very important to them. You're like a mosquito, and they don't really care whether you survive or not. Whatever they say, for the most part, for whatever they say.
And that makes an interesting tie to angels again too, because if you read anything about angels are freaking terrifying.
Oh yeah, yeah.
In modern folklore, that we've made them, the beautiful white-clad, beautiful white wings. They were carrying a blood-covered sword if they looked human at all. So it's an interesting tie-in that the similar alien.
So I have to say this because my trusty assistant just gave me a piece of paper. She said, "Staying home inside." All of a sudden, I feel like a peasant, and the coat is the fae.
Jim, you were going to say something?
Yeah, well, I was going to say about angels, really the angels don't even look human. I mean, they'll have like 4 faces and 6 wings and be made out of triangles and some rotating circles.
Revelation, yeah.
And that's the kind of description that you get. I mean, when you read the Bible, when you get description of angels, for the most part, you get descriptions of things that make no sense whatsoever.
Right.
I mean, that just is that you just know that somebody was looking at that and they had no frame of reference for it at all. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've ever done that. If you've ever come up on something, like if you've been out in the woods and come up on something that you weren't sure what it was, but there was something alive and moving, and until you got to put it in perspective and frame it and see what it was, yep. It can be very, very scary because you're not quite sure what that is.
First time I saw
which end is that? Is that its head? Is that its body?
Right.
I'm not quite certain.
Yeah.
And can it run faster than me when I turn around and go the other way?
No. Can it run faster than everybody? All I need to be is faster than the other people in my party, and I'm okay.
Exactly. Not faster than the monster, just faster than you. That's as much as you need.
That's right. There you go.
Slow people are very popular when you go hiking.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I always take a couple. Yeah.
I always make sure there's a slow person with me. Yeah.
That's why I never go hiking with anybody.
That's one way to avoid that particular problem. Now, taking it kind of from the other angle, what is something that your fae actually fear? What is a fear that they have, if they have one as a group, something that applies to a majority of them? Yes, Jim.
Me.
They fear. Okay.
It's always iron. It's always iron that is the bane of the fae. Iron that brought us out of the Bronze Age. Iron that made steel swords and helped us do all kinds of things, and that made nails, helped us build. Iron was the ultimate assistant in the natural world to humanity. And as a result, for some reason, whatever it is something that the fae do not care for, do not like. They don't run around with it. There's a lot of different variants on what it is about the iron that is just horrible for fae. But at the end of the day, iron's one of those things that they're just like, no, you can just take that out and get rid of it.
That's right. Yeah, don't get near me. Right. Lisa, what about you?
So iron is one of them. When my fae interact with humans, it's always, I always find myself, how am I giving the fae the ability to interact around all the iron without falling down dead or showing that they're really very different, even though they look different and feel different. Thinking somebody is different versus knowing is something entirely, it changes the whole aspect of the relationship. So iron is one, but a lot of my fae fear, not rightfully so, but they fear showing too much emotion with humans. Like when they have a human interaction, they feel like humans are very emotional. So they don't want to get that emotional. Like they like to have a little more control than that. They value self-control, and the ability to keep yourself in order. And they feel like
that's cool. Yeah. I like that.
Well, they feel like we're big messes. And so they don't want to be that way. So when my fae, I have a few fae that get a little bit out of control, and that is a big thing for them to come back from, that they have let their self-control just fall completely off the bus.
Well, that kind of makes sense. If you have them living for so long, then, that does make sense. I would see that would be something you would want to avoid, I suppose.
Well, you can't have 1,000 years of drama llama. Like, that is exhausting. So I understand that.
Drama llama, I love it. Cecilia, what about you?
Mine are similar. So yes, definitely iron. And it was one of the core premises of Web of Truth in a different series of mine, that somehow the fae have started to manage to figure out iron and not be so, in this case, hurt by it. Mm-hmm. But yes, in this series, definitely what they fear most is, emotional vulnerability. So not necessarily showing it, but having it, because it makes them weak.
Gotcha. Okay. Patty.
So because I'm dealing with the post-apocalyptic fae, they fear ceasing to exist. They fear falling under the power of the humans who can breed like flies. They fear each other. I mean, the scariest thing for one of my fae is another fae. I have a group of the fae lords, which are sort of the broken pieces of a dozen of the fae courts stuck together, the most powerful fae that they could find. basically scary and big and scary enough to scare all the rest of the Fae into behaving well. So that, you know, there's a whole cadre of, in folklore, in real folklore, there's a whole cadre of things that live in the woods and in the swamp and that prey on children in particularly gruesome fashions. You know, and so to make those Fae behave themselves, you have to have something really scary. So I have the Grey Lords who are composed of very scary Fae, and not always good Fae. I mean, not good guys, and they have different things that they're working for, and sometimes that explodes into the human realm. But you know, like any story, you have to have motivation for all of your characters, including the Fae. They have to have a reason for why they act. I don't have to tell readers what that reason is. As long as I'm consistent in why a certain person or certain character is acting the way that they are, readers will feel that. They may not know, they don't know who Uncle Mike is and why he behaves the way he does, but they feel that there's a consistency in his behavior from one book to the next that they can kind of count on it until I pull the rug out from under them, maybe. So, but it's a really good tool in a writer's toolbox.
Okay, and Bishop.
So in mine, they're not really afraid of iron, but it is the one thing that it's sort of like with vampires or werewolves, you know, with silver or garlic or what have you, that's what will kill them. And that's what sort of gives wounds that won't heal. And to tie back to what Jim said about, you know, why it always seems to be, I think a lot of it comes with the nature versus the industry type thing, you know, the whole Tolkien hit on it big. And in my world, the reason iron hurts them is because iron is a grounding piece. It is of this world. It is of this dimension. It's not magical at all. And it's sort of like matter versus antimatter for them. But the Rogue Court especially has had to learn to function around it. So they have Fey iron, for example, that they use to make their own tools that functions just like iron, but it isn't iron. They can handle it. And when they need to, they just wear gloves or are careful around it. And but what they fear is kind of twofold. One is not fulfilling a purpose, because all of the Fae, particularly where they come from, they all have specific roles they fill. And with the Rogue Court, they're rogue. They're finding their own way. So it's trying to find their own purpose and their own spot to fill and their own duties to fill. So like, for example, St. Bridget was actually an elf, and she wanted to find a place, so she took on helping children. Even up until the present age, she's helping children, particularly homeless children. But what they also fear are the Fianna, which in Irish folklore were warriors led by Finn McCool. Well, the Fianna are still around. They're sort of the sheriffs of the Fey world. And they can basically hand a fairy their ass in a fight if it comes down to it. They have magical tools that can hurt the Fey, and fairies know to sort of tread lightly around them. And one of the main characters in the first book is the Fian, a warrior of the Fianna. So it's sort of a, you know, when you're not supposed to be able to die, something that will kill you is inherently frightening. But it's also the idea that they're afraid of it because it's sort of an affront against them because they're fairies. So most of them inherently see themselves above us. Not necessarily better in a sense that they're more refined, but like just a better being, like a cow versus a human type of thing. That they're just a superior creation.
So that reminds me of, well, Tolkien, but also C.J. Cherryh and her Tree of Sword and Jewels, and to a certain extent, Heather Alexander. Not Heather Alexander, sorry, wrong person. Laurel K. Hamilton. I don't know why I suddenly confused those two names, but hey, where it's their immortality that they fear losing. And in the Tree of Sword and Jewels, it's if a Fae who's immortal touches mortality, then they die. So a human with their touch can make them die. And that's been, you know, that, and in Tolkien, it was the world is changing. And if you stay with the world, you're going to grow old and die. And somebody, it's not quite that way. There's some other things going on. So somebody's going to come back and yell at me. But that's that idea where the Fae are immortal and humans are mortal. And then that cross brings a lot of tension to a story.
I guess so, and especially if people are going to be coming after you. We'll hope that that doesn't actually happen. I'm sure all of you have had that kind of mail, but I digress. Which of your Fae characters have you most enjoyed writing, and why? What is it about them that have been either the most enjoyable, the most fun, the most satisfying, or whatever? And Lisa, we'll start with you.
I have three. So in my Realm series, the main Fae character is Brennan, and he's actually built on my serious fangirling of Jareth in Labyrinth. He's very similar to him. His father actually looks exactly like David Bowie. So, but I had a good time with him. And then his brother, he has an adopted brother, Drake, that I just love. And I also write paranormal romance under a pen name, and I have been adding Fae characters into that. And the most recent one that I wrote, his name is Caspian. I just love him. Like he's getting the benefit of all of the things that I have learned through writing the Realm and the Amani Prophecy and the Dragon Thief series. This guy has all of, like, he's worried about the human emotions, and he doesn't like the iron, and he is trying to figure out how to, not interact too much with humans. And I'm having so much fun with him now that he's got all of my Fae neuroses.
Lisa, are you comfortable giving us your pen name for that?
No, I don't share the pen name. The pen name.
Okay.
So Lisa writes like sort of steamy, and pen name goes like full on.
Okay. So now I want to read your pen name.
So you know what? After this, I'll give you my pen name, but I don't share it out in public. So I'm not there yet. I'm not ready to come out yet.
For listening, I get the pen name, and you all don't.
That's right. Jim.
Oh, right. Wait, what was the question?
Favorite character to write.
You're right. Favorite Fae characters. My own takeoff of the White Witch, Queen Mab.
Yes.
Or rather,
She's
the White
so
Witch
awesome.
is probably more a takeoff of Queen Mab than anything else, to be honest with you. But Mab is the man. Mab runs things. She is the big bad wicked grandmother of everything dark and dangerous in the fairy world. And she is used to dealing with everything, but she's got a limit that is a problem for her. She can't kill anybody. Like her own people, sure, that's no problem. But like mortals and stuff like that, she's not allowed. She's not allowed to take life. Which is why there is always a position for each of the fairy queens of they have kind of an executioner. They have a knight, and their knight is able to take some of the power of the Fae queens, whether of winter or summer, and use it to execute their will and their enemies.
Mm-hmm.
And what I really appreciate what you've done with Mab over the course of the series, from a personal standpoint, is that just making her you see more of her motivation. She's become more real, and in a way that, and I don't want to say humanize exactly, because that's not exactly what I mean, but it makes you understand kind of what makes her tick, and yet at the same time, that also can make her even more scary than she was before. So it's a very interesting dichotomy when you read her. So
yeah, she doesn't get less scary as you get to know her. I mean,
exactly, that's right.
She didn't exactly start off fluffy bunnies, and she doesn't get any nicer as you go.
Right.
So.
I have to say, I got to read Battleground, and it is freaking amazing.
Oh,
Absolutely amazing.
not torture.
Mab rules. She's absolutely my favorite character in that book. She was so freaking amazing. To actually see her kind of come unglued and show you what she could do was so much fun. I can't tell you how much fun it was. So, free advertising.
I always partial to Toot. I think Toot's great.
Oh, Toot is awesome.
Yeah, he is. Cecilia.
So definitely Raina, the protagonist of this series. She originally appeared as a secondary character in Blood Shadow, the third Lycanthropy Files book, as her very troublemaking Fae self. And so I was like, okay, this is a character who needs to have her own book, and her own book is now turned into 3 books, probably 5 books, maybe more books, because once I got into her head It just got to be so much fun.
That is the
Because
best. That is the best.
Yes. Yes, it is, especially since there is this romance subplot between her and a gargoyle, and they have long been traditional enemies, and so it's a total slow burn enemies to
Oh, friends to
lovers.
lovers. I mean, enemies to lovers is the best. It is
It
is.
the best.
Definitely, especially since he's a nerdy know-it-all, and it's great taking him down. So that would be number one, and then you can sort of see in Shadows of the Heart the cover to that one side. It's the one that just came out actually yesterday, as of the day of this filming.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Yes, for those of you who are missing going to Dragon Con, it is set at the fictional Fae Con, so we still get our con fix. And she has a companion, a Grimalkin, which is a gray Fae creature who looks like a cat most of the time. Definitely has his own agenda that will also be revealed over the series, but he might or may not be modeled off of my own fuzzy critter named Timothy Mouse.
May or may not. I like that. Okay.
May or may not. Well, you know, any resemblance is completely accidental.
Patty, what about you?
You know, you always like the characters you hang with the longest. The longer I have a character that in my hot hands that I can play with and torture and torment, or be tortured and tormented by, depending on the character, that's the ones I like best. So Siebold Adalbert-Schmeider was the first Fae that I brought in. And my favorite thing about him is he's just essentially a grumpy old man with a big sword that you really don't want to tick off. And but it's a balancing act with him not to make him Mercy's answer to everything, because and I do that with a balance. She can't ask him to do something without paying him for something. And it's not always obvious in the novel the way it's what's working, but she's very careful about what she asks him. He sold her the business that she runs, where she's a mechanic. He sold her that. She never misses a payment, never ever misses a payment. And you know, if he were a human, he'd probably have given it to her, right, by this point. But he's not. And she knows that if she misses a payment, she's in real trouble, and it's scary trouble. It's not just oh, you have to give it back. It's not like that. It's, we made a bargain. You've welched out on your bargain. Bad things are going to happen. Mm-hmm. But he's fun, and he's fun to pull out because he essentially doesn't do much more in most of the books other than give her advice or give her bad advice, and work on cars. And just by giving, it's one of those, as a writer, I really love playing the Easter egg thing. So if people have read the whole series, know who he is, and I can do things like have the car jump a little bit when he yells at it, or something like that. And everybody goes, ha, 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 and then goes on. So, including me. So he's my favorite, but there's a lot of them that I've enjoyed over the years. It just depends on what book, what scene I'm working on.
He has remained a stalwart favorite for you, I suppose.
I think it's because I love saying Siebold Adalbert-Schmeider. That's the only thing my German degree has done for me, is I can say Siebold's name correctly.
What about you?
So I have two favorite characters. One is kind of a cheat that she's not actually a fae, she's a human, but she's a human wizard. She's a homeless teenage girl named Wraith who does magic through quantum mechanics. And the first book sort of introduces the world, and the further books sort of follow her through a homeless society of fake kids and magical kids. And I was homeless twice, so homeless kids are a big thing for me. And they're referred to as slingers or 50s. So the changelings are 50s because they're 50-50, half human, half fae. And the wizards are slingers or spell slingers. But Wraith is starts off as the unwilling hero, but she is sort of the idea that I like the characters that normally are sort of dejected and looked down on, who stand up for everybody else when nobody else will, even though they really have no reason to bother. And I actually liked her so much, I don't know if you can see, I had a picture of her commissioned.
Oh, great. Yeah.
That's cool.
That's great.
And I absolutely adore her because I've made her sort of geeky and dorky too, that she's the kind of person I would have wanted to be friends with when I was a teenager. But she's also not afraid to call people out on their crap. But the second favorite character is, ironically, was originally supposed to be a throwaway character. When I wrote one of the main characters for my first book, my editor told me I had to tone him down because he was sort of too perfect, too shiny. We had to rough him up a little bit, give him some more flaws. Well, the throwaway character I had was named Dante, who was the magister of the rogue court, one of the higher nobles. And he is tall, beautiful, rich, very athletic, can kick ass in combat, you know, charming, all that good stuff. And everybody seemed to love him. So it was like, oh, great. The one character that was supposed to be the throwaway that I wasn't supposed to do is the one that everybody really liked.
The walk-on ends up being the big hit.
Right. But he also sort of ends up being the moral center that is sort of the guidance that he really takes his role seriously in terms of wanting to do the right thing and do right by other people and having a longer view of things. Including when it comes down to it, helping with a lot of the homeless kids and finding a place for them. Which, on just a brief side note, it didn't start off that way, but it worked out as a good analogy that the Fae kids that are street kids, the 50s, are a really good analogy for LGBTQ kids. That a huge number of homeless kids are LGBTQ.
Right.
My daughter works in that. She's a social worker and she works with that population.
Right. Yeah, so it's the similar idea of sort of feeling outside and discovering things about yourself that, you know, for one reason or other, maybe people have taught you wasn't normal, and you're trying to find your own clique. So I like that idea of, you know, despite all the perfections Dante has, that he's still, he's kind of aloof and he is deeply shallow, and he'll sleep with just about anybody that he finds attractive.
I love that. Deeply shallow.
Yeah, that's a great term.
It's like thunderous.
He's doing something worthwhile. He's doing something worthwhile.
But he still has that moral center to who he is, that ultimately it's about doing the right thing. And that's what I like about him. And to the point to where in one of the future books, he actually sort of calls out what should be one of the good characters for sort of affronting a friend of his that not showing up at brief spoiler alert, not showing up at a funeral. And he basically calls them out on it, that it was bullshit. And he wished they, you know, why weren't you there if this person was really important to you, that type of thing. So I think it's the characters that are the kind of person that I would like to be. That's sort of the qualities that I find most admirable. Even when it's wrapped in sort of a dusty, crinkly wrapper that's got some marks on it. Although with Dante, it's, you know, wrapped in platinum with a beautiful bow from Tiffany's.
And even if he's gay, he's still
artisan.
I don't know about you guys, but I don't like my men cuter than me. So, you know.
Isn't cute, beautiful. He is the definition of the word beautiful.
More beautiful. More beautiful.
Yeah.
more beautiful. Now, for our last question, I would like to know if there is a particular type of fae, whether it's something from folklore or someone, or just whatever the case may be, or something that you've become more aware of through popular culture. Is there something you haven't used yet, but you'd like to? Jim?
Well, I mean, yeah, always. But something in specific though, I don't know. I think I've gotten to use all my favorite ones. I haven't really gotten to do much with Fae Hounds yet, and that would be fun.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, with Kushi.
Oh, okay. Cool. Cecilia?
I've always been fascinated by Selkies, and I'm definitely planning on using them sometime in the near future. And there was also, talking about throwaway characters that I really need to get back to. There was a were-shark in my book, Long Shadows, and I have done nothing else with these things. And I'm like, okay, they need to come back too. And you know what? That would be a perfect pairing.
Oh, there you go. I would.
So nobody else do that.
Nobody else.
Okay.
Patty, how about you?
So there are no news stories in the world. I think Nalini Singh has a were-shark, or what could be a shapeshifter shark. It doesn't matter. It's a cool idea. Use it. It's awesome.
Will do.
Right. Yeah. Run for it with it. happened upon when I was in college through my older sister. She's 4 years older than I am, and she's so much smarter, and I found so many things from her. But one of the things I found was a book called An Encyclopedia of Fairies by Catherine Briggs, no relation. And I've since acquired a whole bunch more of her work. She was a folklorist who was working in the 60s and 50s to 70s kind of time, where she was collecting folklore and fairy tales, organizing them, putting them into categories, just little snippets of stories. Some of the stories don't make any sense. And they're just a treasure trove. So yeah, I have all of these things that I get to play with, and I'm certainly going to pull them all out. What you were saying, Cecilia, about the waterborne fae. I mean, there's so many of them, and I have a problem with them because we humans and my human characters don't get in the water very often. And since I put a monster in the water, I don't get in the water very often either, which is sad. I haven't been in Columbia River, which I used to swim in all the time since I wrote River Marked.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Not absolutely.
Traumatized myself. I try to pretend that that's not it. Maybe I'm just old and fat, but there we go. But there's so much folklore out there, particularly the specific folklore. So, Village X that has this little fairy that inhabits this little cave. We have in Americas, we have the Bell Witch, right? And we think that's really unique, is our Bell Witch. But in England, in Scotland, in Ireland, they're all over the place, that kind of thing. So that gives you just an endless treasure trove to go play with. And for all of you writers out there, I highly recommend going out. The Encyclopedia of Fairies by Catherine Briggs is the easiest one to find. And it's also the easiest, it's set up alphabetically, so it's the easiest one to kind of page through. And in the Encyclopedia of Fairies, it's just exactly what it says. It's a description of the different creatures. So it makes it really useful for anybody writing. It also is a really useful tool for those of you who do gaming. So.
Cool, thank you. And what they actually are it's set up like an encyclopedia. That's nice. Bishop.
Yeah, it's like reading the monster manual. It's awesome.
Right?
With mine, since I kind of get to dip from all different cultures, what I wanted with the premise in my world is that humans got about 20% of it right. So there's some grounding to these folklores and fairy tales that people know from the different cultures, but there's so much more to it that they don't. But I actually would like to delve into nymphs a little more, tying back into water fae. And one of the reasons is I heard, and I don't know how far back this goes or how much truth to it is, but that water fae know all the secrets of humanity, and they're constantly sharing them with each other as gossip hounds, which is why you have that the
Like
sound
demons.
of the brooks and the rivers is actually the fae sharing all these secrets with each other. So I'd like to delve a little more into that, and I would also, I'm going to call it an homage to Jim. I have Santa as a fae in my world. Just briefly touched on.
Obviously, because Lion the Witch in the Wardrobe. Obviously.
The Hogfather. Don't forget Terry Pratchett.
Also, yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, Terry, whatever. But he came along later. I found him later. It wasn't as romantic as C.S. Lewis because I was younger.
Okay.
But yeah, and I would also like to have some fun with that. That sort of taking the idea and putting it on its head. I mean, I had a novella that was a Christmas setting where the Krampus were fairies, and there was sort of an anti-Krampus, that it was a hope child, and if the hope child loses hope, they become a Krampus. So the Krampus are trying to make them bitter and see the world in darkness, but if you can get to them and give them hope, then they become a beacon of light and inspiration and hope for the world and make Christmas Christmas. So it's being able to sort of to pick and choose and bastardize everything. But yeah, it's nymphs and Santa.
Isn't that what you guys all do, though? I mean, isn't that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Lisa, what about you?
I'm with Cecilia. I really like to do more with the Selkie. I've started getting into more water supernatural. So I have several series in pen name land that are dealing with sirens and mermaids. And so I'd really like to do more with the water fae. But I would actually like to do, and I have shied away from this, but I'm finding it's more interesting the longer that I write. I would really like to do truly dark fae, like truly dark, because I like that very black and white, but I don't know about you guys, but when I write, I can't necessarily write a character that is all black or all white. Like I end up giving in somewhere and they have some good or some bad. And I would like to write a truly, truly dark character. Truly dark. I don't know if I would ever be able to do it, but I'd really like to.
Well, now, well, on that note, I want to thank
So happy.
Yeah, really, I was going to say, and here's Bishop talking about the hopeful child, and you're talking about the dark fae.
I'm the Krampus.
There you go. But I want to thank all of you for being here. Thank you so much for doing this. It would have been great to be able to see all of you in person next weekend, but yeah, a week and a half from now, I guess. But we know that can't be, and we'll all have our fingers crossed for 2021.
I feel like you should have a black armband. Right.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
During the weekend. But
I think we're ready to just, I mean, I think I'm really ready. I don't know about y'all, but come next year, I don't need to talk about 2020 anymore.
No.
I mean,
that's right. Yeah.
we don't have to put it in the books. We can just asterisk 2020.
I am going to celebrate January 1st, 2021. I'm
Yes.
going
Oh my God, that is going to be.
We're just going to celebrate.
Well, you know, the thing that's weird is it's not that far away. I mean, not really.
I know, it's
But
August
imagine
already.
You're not authored by George Martin. You know?
But again, I want to thank you so much. I will give you a hand since we don't have an
Oh, thank you.
All
We'll
right.
do a hand.
Thank you.
You're very
guys.
Awesome.
And I hope that, you know, that we will be able to all be together next year. I really do. So
Fingers
Well, I look
crossed.
forward to it. It's
crossed.
really good to see my fellow writers. This has been really fun.
Yeah.
Yes.
Next year.
Definitely.
thank you again, you guys. I appreciate it very much. And tell your animals hello and goodbye.
Okay.